So there's that. There's also your SEER rating, your EAR rating. So those are efficiency ratings. You're going to spend maybe an extra $500, $1,000 for that high efficiency unit. But think about what draws the most power in your house. Your HVAC system, it's running all the time. It's kind of like a refrigerator, how they say, oh, this one's going to cost you $200 a year in energy because it's always running.
Hi, everybody. Jose Luis Morales here. Welcome back to another episode of the Morales Group Show. Today, we have a very special guest. The name is Dan Loesch with Dan Loesch Construction. And today, we are going to be talking about how to make your ADU more energy efficient. We are going to be talking about Title 24. We are going to be talking about solar panels. We're going to be talking about ways to design the ADU where it's more environmentally friendly. Welcome to the show, Dan. How are you?
Hey, Jose. I'm doing good. I'm excited to be on the show.
I'm excited about this topic. It's something we have not covered, but I think it's something important as people are designing and building ADUs. So for our viewers that don't know who Dan Loesch or Dan Loesch Construction is, how did you get involved in the ADU? And then if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about yourself and your company as well, too.
Yeah, so I've always been involved in construction since I was a little kid. Most of my family is in construction. My father, my brother-in-law, sister, pretty much everyone I know as well. So grew up in that environment. I went to college at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, majored in architectural engineering, worked for a few different engineering firms and construction companies, and then got into residential construction. I've been in business for about 10 years now. About 5 years ago, there was a lot of talk about how do we solve the housing crisis in California. And these ADU structures weren't being built before 2020 because there was so much red tape. It was so hard to build. You had to have additional parking spots. And so right around 2020 is when you saw the laws officially, they were enacted. They've been talked about for a few years. And so you saw this ADU market explode. So we had changed from being a strictly residential construction company to now specializing in ADUs, accessory dwelling units.
Got it. I love it. So I have built several ADUs and we're in the process of getting more permits. But to be very transparent with our viewers, I've never really taken into consideration like how to be more energy efficient. What is Title 24? How to be more environmentally friendly. So I think it's a good topic for our viewers, even if you don't do it, just to be aware of it. So if somebody wanted to make their ADU more energy efficient or eco-friendly, what's the first thing that they should know?
First of all, there's code compliance, right? We're in California, you're in California as well. So our energy code is called Title 24. That's our energy conservation code where we have a point system. It's called the performance method, where you're going to get positive points for things that are environmentally friendly, and you're going to get negative points for things that take up a lot of electricity, like say a high-powered HVAC unit or a lot of square footage. You have a very large ADU or home. And Title 24 applies to any new construction, whether that's a home that you see, a production house, a custom home, or an ADU. So that's going to be your baseline, and that changes every year, and it gets a little more strict every year. So that's the minimum that we are going to go for is Title 24 compliance. And then above and beyond that, obviously the goal is to make your home as well insulated and energy efficient with the appliances. So that way you're only going to be using a small amount of electricity. That way, if you have solar panels, now you don't have to have as many. And so we're going to delve into that today about how we get everything to be more efficient via ADU placement, via your HVAC system, your insulation, how you install that insulation. So we've got a lot of different topics that we're going to cover.
I love it. So let's start off by talking about insulation.
So probably 20 years ago, we just stuffed insulation into our walls. We called it an R13. So that's like a rating. So think of like calories in food, right? That's how much energy, a hamburger or a piece of toast can produce, right? Mm-hmm. So your R value is your insulation, an R1, an R2, R10, R20. These are values that heat is transferred from outside of your house to inside of your house at a certain rate. So R13 was the standard years ago. Now you're putting an R15, R19, R21 in these exterior walls. So your walls are getting a lot thicker. And then we're also talking about installing insulation correctly. You don't want any compression in your insulation. And so there's a certain way that you can cut around wires and you can stuff a little behind them. And by doing that, what you're doing is now you've got these air voids in between your wall cavity that it's not allowing heat to go from your exterior to your interior wall at a faster rate. So that's going to make sure that your heating and cooling load on your HVAC, you're going to run your HVAC for, let's say, 10 minutes, 20 minutes on a hot day, as opposed to 2 hours. So you're going to be running that a lot less. You're going to be using a lot less energy. We're also seeing much more insulation in the attic. We're seeing subfloor insulation and raised foundations. So these things are things that weren't done 10, 20 years ago like they are now. It was just an afterthought. And what we've seen a lot in our ADUs is if you have like an R50, R60 in the attic, now you're running that HVAC hardly at all. You can open a window, let in a little cool air. That house will stay the same temperature for most of the day. So that's really important, is the better you can seal in your house and the better your installation of your insulation, you're going to really see that come out in energy efficiency big time.
What's the highest R rating, just out of curiosity?
I mean, really, it's whatever, however thick of a wall cavity you can go. If you wanted to go a 2x10 wall, like out in Maine, where it's -4 degrees in the wintertime, so they have to heavily insulate their walls, you could see up an R30, R40 in just your walls. In some of our ADUs, we do R60 in our attic space. We'll do an R38 on the ceiling deck, and then we'll do an R19 up on the top of the roof rafters. And so, at that point, you basically don't need an HVAC system.
Basically, the more extreme the weather, more likely the higher R rating that you're going to need, basically, to kind of keep the home at a good temperature as well, too. What about like spray insulation? Does that make a difference at all? And if so, are there certain ones that are better or worse?
Yeah, for like, let's say a much larger home, or let's say you have a small ADU that has just a 2x4 rafter, you're converting a detached garage, you may have to do a spray foam insulation, because the R value on a spray foam insulation is much better than a typical batt, what you see in a home. So it's very expensive. It's very messy. It's a difficult process, probably cost 10 times as much as a traditional insulation system. But if you're in a very specific situation where you need it, it's very, very high efficiency.
I love it. Good. So let's talk about appliances. Like, how can somebody make their ADU more energy efficient with appliance choice?
So one thing that's really cool about appliances now, and it's in the future, what it's going to be is these smart appliances. Like, let's say your smart thermostat, it's going to sense when you're not home, and then it's going to work less, because it's going to say, oh, we're going to keep your home at 78, 80 degrees. And it's going to learn off of that. You won't even have to set it. If you buy one of these Energy Star smart thermostats, like a Nest or something like that, you're going to have a situation where you go off to work every day, and it knows that you're gone for 9 hours, Monday through Friday, from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So it's going to learn off of that, and it's going to check your habits, and you're not even going to have to set your thermostat. And the same goes with, your dishwasher. Your dishwasher is just going to go off on a certain time, et cetera, et cetera. All of your appliances now are going to be moving that way. We've actually had some really cool smart mini split HVAC units where they have a little eye in them, and that eye tracks your body heat. And then they have these louvered vents that shoot at you. So you're not just blowing cold air throughout the whole house. You're specifically tracking the occupants in that house, and you're shooting air at them. So that's kind of the future of where we're headed.
Appliances. So basically, the smarter the technology, the more energy efficient it's going to be. What about windows? Let's talk about windows as well, too.
Yeah, now 20 years ago, your standard was a single pane, dual pane windows were coming out, and with Windows, you have two things. You have the solar heat gain coefficient, and you have the U factor. So your U factor is it's like the R factor that we talked about. It's insulation value, how fast that heat goes from the outside of the house to the inside of the house. Then you've also got the solar heat gain coefficient, which it's almost like tinted sunglasses, right? It's that how much heat can the sunlight create in your ADU or your home. So those are the two big factors. And every year, these new windows are coming out. They're getting better and better. And they're actually finding new specialty windows that you can buy at some of these trade shows where they have actual R13 glass. It's very thick. It's probably 50 really small micro panes, very expensive. But you're going to start seeing a lot less heat that's transferred through windows as time goes on.
Got it. Now, how are windows? What's like for Title 24? So I've heard that windows and the HVAC have to do with the Title 24 as well, too. That there's certain windows that are Title 24 compliant. Do ADUs require Title 24 compliant windows?
Yes. So anytime you have conditioned space, you have to comply with Title 24, right? And that's that point system we discussed, right? So if your window has a very low U factor, which is good, then that's going to give you positive points on your Title 24. So when you're hearing Title 24 compliant windows, that's a genuine or a general classification that says you have a U factor of 0.3 or less, and you have a solar heat gain coefficient of 0.23 or less. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of a general rule. I wouldn't buy windows that aren't Title 24 compliant, just because as a rule of thumb, even if you don't have to have them, that energy loss that you're going to get from your windows is huge. We run these Title 24 analysis, and one of the biggest factors is windows. People love to drape the exterior envelope of their homes in windows, but to compensate for, let's say, 4 or 5 more windows, energy usage wise, now you're going to have to put an extra R20, R30, R40 up in your attic. So you can see that heat loss that you get from your walls is massive.
So basically making sure that if you're doing windows in California, make them Title 24 compliant, and that's going to obviously help the energy usage, which is obviously going to save you guys money in the long term, basically, versus making them compliant. What about the HVAC and AC? What can they do there to be more green or more energy efficient?
So I heard a statistic the other day on HVAC, something like after 10 years, a ducted HVAC system has only 80% efficiency, meaning that those ducts are leaking, and they just leak from constant use, dust, crap getting in there. And so I recommend for most of our clients, for an ADU, they're very small, doing a ductless system. So those can be like the wall mount ones. Sometimes you see like in a restaurant or someone's garage that they put a temporary AC unit in there. And those ones really, you don't have to worry about that efficiency loss from having ducts, right? So if you can place a single unit, like a ceiling register, in your ADU kind of around the middle, then you don't need that ducted system that's going to crap out on you in 10 years. So there's that. There's also your SEER rating, your EAR rating. So those are efficiency ratings. You're going to spend maybe an extra $500, $1,000 for that high efficiency unit. But think about what draws the most power in your house. Your HVAC system. It's running all the time. It's kind of like a refrigerator, how they say, oh, this one's going to cost you $200 a year in energy because it's always running. There's not very many things in your home that are always running. One of them being your HVAC. So if I had to tell someone who's building an ADU, what are you going to do? Yeah, you're going to get that high efficiency ductless system, and then you're never going to have to service it for 15, 20 years, or at least replace it. You'll have to service it, obviously, but it's not going to cost you maintenance, and it's not going to cost you the energy loss that you're going to have with a traditional system.
Is there any hazards when the ducting system leaks at all? Like, is that like a health hazard at all if that leaks?
I would say in like an older home with poor insulation, if you have, insulation penetrating into the ducts, then it's probably a problem. Um, but I don't see, because you have that positive airflow. I don't
Yeah.
see it being too much of an issue as far as your health. But they do make really good filtration systems. I know my wife and I, we have filtration systems in our house. You can buy a good one for like $600.
Hmm.
Um, I recommend that, and especially if you're going to really go all out on energy efficiency, you're sealing your home, and so you're sealing your home. You're breathing that CO2, right? And you have a sealed house. Not saying you're going to suffocate, but all that air, now you just have that CO2 in your house, and you have to filter it out somehow, right? So they make HRV systems, they call them, and what those do is they'll take all that stale air and they'll shoot it out and they'll bring in fresh air. And you can buy one of those systems, or you can just get an air filter, or you can run an exhaust fan. Those are I highly recommend doing something like that, just because you're sealed up so much that you're going to be breathing each other's exhaust essentially.
Yeah. Got it. What about solar panels?
So solar out here in California, solar has kind of changed, because now it's a requirement for any new structure, including ADUs, including homes. The issue with solar panels that were built 10 years ago was they didn't last but maybe 20 years, and they started losing efficiency. So these new panels are going to be lasting 30 to 40 years, which is great, because now you don't have to replace the panels. They're higher wattages. They make inverter systems now that shadowing isn't a problem. So the new solar panels are great, but we have an issue here in California with our utility companies, where our utility companies will buy back that electricity at a much cheaper rate than they sell it to you for, right?
Hmm.
So I would say, if you're just going to install solar panels, let's say you spend $25,000 on a small solar system, you're wasting $25,000. If you really want to be energy efficient and you want to save money and make it worth your while, you'll buy a backup battery system. And that might cost you another 15,000. You might be spending 40,000. But at that point, you're storing that energy and you're using that energy at night when your solar panels aren't producing
Producing.
electricity. So now that you've coupled your low energy usage in your home, right? You don't have to have as many panels, and you can store that electricity.
Mhm.
That those three things right there are going to make sure that you have a zeroed out bill every month. But that, like I said, it's everything. It's insulating your house properly. It's using the smart appliances, the smart thermostat, and then it's also doing the solar panels and the battery backup system. So if you do those three things, then you're going to be, at a zero, net zero electric usage off the grid.
I love it. So we talked about insulation. We talked about appliances. We talked about windows. We talked about HVAC. We've talked about solar. Is there anything that we're missing if somebody wanted to make their ADU more energy efficient or just more green?
Okay, so what we've talked about have been, let's say, the high ticket items, right? That
Uh-huh.
$20,000 here, $10,000 there, $40,000 here. So those things can cost, you add them up in the aggregate, and that could be almost $100,000, right? It could be $80,000 to really make sure you have that net zero system going. And the rate of return might be, let's say, 8, 9 years, 10 years even. It's still worthwhile because your electric bills are going up and up, but that rate of return, because of your initial investment, is a little bit longer. The cheap things you can do, the free things you can do, are placement, right? You can place a window. You could place a window in, let's say you have the ADU built on a hill, right?
Mhm.
You have that Bernoulli effect, kind of wind flowing up to that ADU. Well, now you've placed your window strategically at the front, and then you've placed windows strategically at the back. And so now you have that breeze running through, and you open the window in the morning and you get that cool air in, you get what I'm saying is now you don't
Yeah.
have to run that HVAC at all. And then you also have placement on, we live in the Northern Hemisphere. So you're going to want to place that ADU's roof, if you have solar panels, to the south. You want that southern exposure because that sun, if you look at, they call it, I think, an azimuth. If you did a sun diagram, it's always going to be south in the fall. It's always going to be south in the spring and the summer. And so you're always, all year long, you're going to be hitting those solar panels. And then if you also think about your roof layout, if you go with a standard gable roof, now 50% of your roof is going to be facing north. So instead of going with a standard gable roof, let's say you offset that, right? Now you have twice as much surface area facing the south. Or if you went with a monoslope roof, just a single pitched sideways roof, architecturally it may not be, what you're into, but you can make it look good. And then you have twice as much surface area on there for your solar panels. So now instead of 8 panels, now you can get 16. So that right there didn't cost you anything. And now you have a much more efficient solar system because you correctly did that roof line. There's also, I think placement is key, and you also have issues like what we have in backyards. People don't realize when you build trees around the perimeter of your backyard, you create this heat island effect, right? The wind can't come in, but your sun is baking. The sun is just baking the center of your backyard. We'll go in backyards with trees. It'll be 75 degrees, during the day, and it'll feel like 90 because that heat has nowhere to go. And so you really want to make sure that you're not just draping your backyard with trees, and you're able to get that sun in there for the solar panels, but you got to let that wind kind of cool down that area. Because if you have that heat island, now you're going to be running that HVAC system. So again, those are things that cost $0. But if you screw those up, now you're going to have way more panels, which costs you way more money, tens of thousands of dollars more. You might have to have another backup battery system. So, those are the placement is really something that you're going to want to be wise about.
Got it. Anything else that we're missing as it relates to making the ADUs more efficient? And by the way, I love this conversation. The reason is that we're going very in depth into this topic, which I think is helpful for viewers as well.
So I would say, we've talked about what can work for the general public and what your typical ADU builder is going to be doing. But there's also a category of high-end ADUs, right? Your LEED certification that you're trying to get. So I wouldn't recommend that for someone who's trying to build a $200,000 or $300,000 ADU. But let's say that you live in a Beverly Hills type neighborhood and you're really trying to get top dollar for your home. Something like a LEED certification is going to go a long way in that $5-10 million house, because someone's going to now buy that and they're going to think, okay, well, this house has a certain prestige to it, and getting that LEED certification is very difficult to get. So you have to do things. So a LEED certification, it's an organization where they'll come in and it's a lot of documentation. You'll see it in, let's say, a high-rise project. Schools often are LEED certified, or big state buildings, government buildings. And they go through everything from how many parking spaces were there, the construction practices to build it, were those green? The materials, were those sourced from sustainable farms, or where did everything, down to the nail they'll get on these certifications. And so if you know that you have a product that's LEED certified, that the environment was protected at every step of the way, right? Very difficult to do. But if you're going to go with a high-end ADU project, it's really something to consider. So one thing that I learned about recently were these geothermal systems. And it's basically a heat exchanger where they send a fluid down into the ground, because the ground is a constant 54 degrees Fahrenheit. And so what they do is they send that fluid down into the ground, and that let's say at 70, 80 degrees, whatever the exhaust is, then it cools it down to 54 and it brings it back up. And you can take that heat differential and you can now produce electricity with it. So they actually use these geothermal systems to help your HVAC unit along, so it uses less electricity. And it's not that expensive in the equipment to build, but it's very difficult to build it because you have to dig down trenches and it can be costly in that sense. But again, if we're going for the full shebang and you want to get that LEED certification, then you're going to have to explore stuff like that, right? I've even heard of hay bale construction, which is wild. I didn't even know you could actually build structurally with hay bales.
What's a hay bale?
Like basically grass, it's weeds essentially, right? Compressed weeds. So anyway, there's all sorts of cool, innovative stuff that's coming out, and I think the one thing that I'm looking forward to are some of these appliance and electronics shows. So that's what you're seeing in the next 5 years, right? Like you're seeing these new induction chargers for your cell phone, and they're going to be incorporated in your countertops, right? So you're not going to have that friction loss from a wire, and so it's just going to be this accumulation of all these smart appliances that are going to be using electricity. There's smart panels now. Oh, geez, I can get into that. The electrical panels for your house, they'll actually show you now just if there's some type of a loss or inefficiency in your wiring to an outlet. They'll say, oh, well, this is drawing this many amps. And you're wondering, why is it drawing that many amps? And there's something wrong with it. And so just something like that, it's 1,000 little small things that you could be fixing at very little cost.
I love it. Are there any government incentives for doing any of these items? Like, so for example, like any rebates, tax breaks, incentives?
Yeah. There's a 30% federal rebate for almost anything you do. Insulation, your solar system, your battery backup system, full 30%. I think that's going to drop down in a couple of years to, I think, like 28 or 26. But they've basically been renewing this 30% incentive program for the last, 10 years. And Congress keeps approving it. There's also local utility rebates too, because they will want you to go from gas to electric. So you can, I've heard of HVAC upgrades where they'll go to our local utility company and they'll give them $10,000 in rebates. So really your HVAC, to me, that's a no-brainer, right? That should be, if you have a home, you need to upgrade that. If you have an old system, immediately. That's going to be your biggest game changer. And quite frankly, solar with a battery backup system, that's probably the next thing I would do, because that's going to get that 30% rebate as well. And then you may even be able to get utility rebates with the solar system, depending on your utility company.
Got it. I love it. Anything else, Dan, that you think would be helpful for our viewers?
I would say if you're going to be building an ADU and you're going to have green energy and energy efficiency in your mind, I would definitely hire an architect or someone that specializes in design, as opposed to saying, hey, we're going to do it ourselves, or do things like an owner builder, because there's just so many ways that you can back yourself into having a $400 a month electric bill versus a zeroed out completely, electric bill that, that pays itself off in 5-10 years for what you spent up front.
I love it. So here's what I wanted to ask you. If somebody wanted to build an ADU, how does your company help them? And if so, how do they get a hold of your company as well too?
So we're a full design build company. We do plans in-house. We do design. Then we go through a pre-construction process where we will take all of what you have, value engineer it, and get you down to a specific budget that you need. Then we'll get you through the building department. We'll get you your permits. We'll do the Title 24 analysis. we'll do the truss plans, and then we'll build it. And as funny as it sounds, the building is usually only about 3 or 4 months, but all the planning could be, we've had it take over a year. So
Yeah.
a lot of back and forth. I'm sure if you build ADUs, the upfront is a lot. So definitely, if you're looking to build an ADU next year sometime, give me a call. You can reach us in the greater Sacramento area, 916-208-3406, or check out our website, dlcbuilt.com, our Instagram handle at Loesch Construction, DLOESCH Construction.
I love it. So, Dan, I wanted to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. This is obviously a topic that we have not covered. I think it's a topic that's very valuable. I learned some things about insulation today, windows, HVACs, stuff that I didn't know. And obviously, I've been in the industry for 13 years. For our viewers out there, if you've enjoyed today's episode, we had Dan Loesch. He talked about how to make an ADU more efficient. If you've enjoyed it, make sure to hit that subscribe button. If you feel that this episode will be helpful, make sure to hit that share button. Dan, thanks again. And to our viewers, until next time.